on AI and, if you will, augmentation, or IA, what Doug Engelbart once called intelligence augmentation. And way back when, 1962, at the dawn of interactive computing, there were two labs on either side of Stanford University. John McCarthy, who had fled MIT because they wouldn't let him do time sharing, was trying to build an AI on one side of campus, and Doug Engelbart was trying to augment humans on the other side of campus, and that created two communities, and they haven't spoken to each other since. In the brief time that we have allowed, we're going to try to square that circle. So our panelists are Dimitris Papageorgiou, John van Reenen, Krystyn van Vliet, and Sophie Vandebroek. My worst challenge of the day. But Dimitris, why don't you start?
Sure. First of all, thank you for being here. And I have this pictorial back, which has how we got to where we are today in terms of technology stacks and landscape. And the reason why I have it here is most people will see multiple technologies that are kind of connected with each other. What I see is a pool of talent. This is where we draw people for where we need to go next. So people that have been doing this type of work for the last 15, 20 years are the people that we're trying to reskill and upskill in terms of bringing them forward with artificial intelligence. And this has given us the foundation needed in order to get there. We now have a lot of technologies that provide inputs to the artificial intelligence process and provide the data points required for us to actually apply the algorithms. And all these, I would say, technologies were played first in the retail market and the consumer market, and then made their way into the back office of operations and commercialized, fully commercialized. So we all have been exposed to some degree with AI through Siri and Google and other applications, and now we're seeing that this is making its way to the enterprise level. So to an earlier discussion, we heard about enterprise grade. I think that's how we are bringing things forward. First, we give them into the retail and for the consumers to actually experience, and then bring them into the enterprise level. Second thing is, we tapped a little bit earlier on the topic of what does this will have as an impact for jobs in the future. And I will tell you, the reason why we're all so concerned about jobs is because we are still thinking 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. We're thinking of in terms of full-time employment, and that is not where we're heading. We are heading towards employment for skills, employment for knowledge, not employment for a role or a task that somebody has to do. And that result is actually gonna lead to much more flexible working arrangements and probably less time needed to perform those activities. So the FTE is probably gonna be dead as a notion in the years to come because we will not be working the same way we worked in the past. So the first thing is, we're gonna have the demise of traditional design for organizations. It's no longer gonna be the paradigm where individuals enter a company at junior level positions and work their way up, because there are not gonna be a lot of junior positions if we automate these things. So how are people gonna be trained? How are people gonna become experienced enough to become managers? So we have to think this as we are progressing in this space. Second is leadership. How do you apply leadership in a digital environment where you actually have digital colleagues as well as humans? How do you reward people? How do you enable them to be productive? And last is the end of the apprenticeship model. People used to go to work for tenure, for pension, and all these things are no longer there. People don't go to a company and hope to retire there 40 years later. People actually will join a company, and a millennial, today's statistics say they will probably jump 8 to 10 times employment in their lifetime, which means about 3 to 4 years per employer. So with these statistics in mind, we know that the paradigm of the full-time employee is no longer there. So how is this gonna come forth, and how are we gonna make sure that organizations actually enable themselves to absorb this type of change? And the one thing that at Ernst & Young we have identified is purpose. Purpose is what drives innovation. Purpose is what drives Progress and purpose is what drives people to become more productive and connected with an organization. So having purpose is in mind as you design this digital path and solutions associated with it is probably the biggest differentiating factor that you can think of. The second thing I would say that you actually have to keep in mind is the ability to change and ingest change, train on change, and diversify. We cannot be as inflexible in what we do or what we think our roles are as we used to be in the past. We have to become much more flexible, much more adapt to the environment that is around us. I was not a technologist by trade. I actually grew up in HR operations and slowly transitioned into technology and eventually took an interest in artificial intelligence and robotic process automation. This is an evolution that is happening for many of us, especially at Ernst & Young. We heard earlier financial audit as a topic, and we as an organization, to many of you, we are an accounting firm, or we're an accounting firm, because we understand that this is not how we're going to survive in the future. So we are changing. We are becoming much more technologically astute, and we try to adapt our business model to what we perceive the need to be in the future. So a lot of us are upskilling, a lot of us are changing, and that's in tune with what the market actually dictates. Audit, which used to be our biggest business, is probably not going to be around in the next 20 to 25 years when many of the processes that we used to audit are now automated. So with that in mind, the topic of this discussion today is augmentation versus automation. And I will tell you what we see in the market. It is heavy automation. Everything is pointing towards automation because everybody's looking for instant gratification in the form of return on their investment. That like, if we do X, what are we gonna get back as Y? And that is the old paradigm, the old thinking again on why we outsourced 20 years ago and we shifted jobs overseas to lower cost locations in order to capture arbitrage. It is purely, let's do the same things we were doing in the past, but do them for less money spent in order to get them done. And we're also seeing now in the market that this is not the solution. One, the return on the investment may not be as significant or as high as initially anticipated by doing just that exact same shift. The second thing is there is not enough talent in the market to make this automation shift happen fast enough without changing the process. So many organizations are now struggling to recruit and upskill individuals within their organizations to meet this demand, this excess demand. And I will tell you, there is a talent war going on out there. And thankfully, thanks to MIT, we are getting a lot of qualified candidates in organizations like mine, but there is still a significant need. We showed geopolitically a huge shift from where we initially thought that talent was going to come in the last couple of years. So there's countries like Estonia and Costa Rica that have gone to their universities and changed the curriculum based on what they predict to be the demand of the future. So this is how deep the change is, and this is how disruptive it's going to be for many countries, many companies, and many individuals.
Dimitris,
So,
we're running up against our time.
Okay, my apologies.
That's okay.
So, move on to the next one.
Thank you.
Who's next?
John Van Reenen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here. So you might be surprised as an outsider coming here because there's a lot of optimism here, but if you actually go out onto the streets or talk to many people, there's a lot of fear. So the main thing I think you experience when reading newspapers or talking to people is that people are very, very fearful about what the impact of new technologies are, like AI and many other things. And this is not new. We've had these moments of history where there's been many periods where there's been a lot of fear of technology. And my view is that the fear is actually not over just technology. It's actually, technology is almost a displacement from fear over many other things. There's fear of immigration, there's fear of trade. And I think what this is rooted in is the economic experience that people have had, especially over the last 10 years after the global financial crisis, and more, actually more over the last 30 or 40 years. As Eric Brynjolfsson said, this has been a very tough time for American workers was slow wage growth. And over the last 10 years, across the whole world, this has been a rather poor time in terms of real wage cuts and high levels of unemployment in many parts of the world. So I think when we think about technology, as other people have said, it has this, it's both difficult to predict what the impact is going to be on the labor market, and there's always this inherent ambiguity. So on one side, many of the new technologies create new occupations, they augment skills. But even those technologies which kind of automate skills, which replace some of the tasks humans do, have this ambiguity. So think of it from a company perspective. If you have a new technology which makes things more efficient, reduces labor costs, yes, you might substitute away from labor into other things, but on the other hand, you can produce things a lot more efficiently, which enables your firm to expand and therefore creates more jobs. So it's the playoff of these two different things, which means that technology on the impact of jobs is inherently ambiguous. And that's true not just at the firm level, but also at the level of the industry, the level of the economy. And the kind of history of the last 200 or 300 years when we've had rapid technological progress is a positive one. We haven't had ever climbing unemployment. In fact, the economy has been able to create new jobs in order to keep unemployment at a kind of similar level. In fact, at the moment, relatively low levels. So the issue for us, I think, from a kind of business point of view and from a society point of view, is the quality of those jobs rather than the quantity of those jobs. It's what wages have, it's what skills people have. And I think the big challenge is, if you think about what the economy is, it's a way of matching different tasks that jobs require with the different skills that people have. And what happens with technology is it destroys some tasks and creates new tasks and therefore demand for new skills. So the question really is how you can move people to be able to produce the new kind of skills which are required. So my mother actually worked in a bank. She was a bank clerk. And a lot of the jobs of the bank clerk was actually giving out money and taking in money. When the ATM machine came along, that destroyed those tasks. But my mother's job didn't disappear. What happened for many bank clerks is they became relationship managers. They started doing different tasks in banks. And what that meant was if you had the flexibility to change what you do, your job didn't disappear at all. It actually could enhance your job. And I think that is a microcosm of what needs to happen in society and the economy as a whole. We have to think of ways in which we can enable people to move across to those new tasks. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. So even within a company, reskilling and retraining people is hard. When that requires you moving to a new job in a new company, or even moving to a new geographical area into another state, that is a very difficult thing to manage. So I think from the kind of policy point of view, what we need to think about is ways of actually creating resilience with people, giving them general education so they can shift tasks. It requires creating insurance so people can more easily move jobs. It's terrible if you lose your health insurance, if you lose your jobs. Most countries don't have that. And it requires compensation mechanisms. So for people who do lose out from this, it is a necessary thing to kind of help them in that process of adjustment. So it's right from a moral point of view, for through no fault of their own they lost skills, they need to be compensated for that. It's right from an efficiency point of view, because you need to create transport infrastructure, retraining, reskills to move them across, although that will let your economy grow. And it's also true from a pure political expedient point of view, because unless we do create these type of systems which create resilience, create ways of people moving into new tasks, moving to new areas, then the populist uprising that we see all over the world will continue. I did my own personal Brexit when I came to MIT last year, but the fact that the UK did Brexit is part of this kind of challenge. There were groups who lost out. That's made people very, very angry, and that's created the kind of social and political problems that we face, not just in America and Britain, but all over the world. Thank you very much.
So I think, your slides, go ahead. Okay.
I think so.
Good.
Excellent.
Well, slide.
Yes. Good. No, it are your slides. We saw them on there, so
They
you go
tricked
first.
us.
Excellent.
They tricked
Oh,
us. All right, thank you. So I'll pick up where that left off with a specific example of what automation versus augmentation means to a sector of the economy, and that's manufacturing. So I actually discussed this in several different settings. How is manufacturing affected by what is called digitalization in certain audiences? And you can see that I often talk about this in the European context where we spell digitized with an S. So you can, if you'd like to watch a longer version of this discussion in a worldwide context, I point you to the YouTube video shown there. But how this affects the citizen and as well as the co-workers and the companies is something that MIT spends a lot of time thinking about, not only for, but including AI. And so AI is part of the technologies that are within Europe and Asia more commonly referred to as Industry 4.0. And many of those of you from companies here today are familiar with that language as well. It has been promoted by Charles Schwab and the World Economic Foundation about thinking about how AI and other technologies that provide automation or augmented human function will affect the workforce as well as the economies. And so we think about this a lot. I'll give you a couple of examples of what that means to the citizen, right? So you think about how your news comes now from automated programs, as has been mentioned in the previous panel, and that you can carry that news around with you, and you may be checking for breaking news right now as I'm talking, right? So that access to information is important. That information can be used to get around. We use it to get around MIT. You use it to get around the city. And companies use it to move products around. So it affects the citizen in some ways the same way that it affects the companies. But then it brings on these consequences, even for the citizen, about how much information to share with whom. So for example, I have an iRobot in my house. It is vacuuming right now because my husband has it on his phone where he can control it from its phone. But I don't install that app on my phone because I don't want that interface, and I don't want anybody to know when I'm vacuuming, okay? So it's all up to personal preference. But these are the things that Internet of Things and AI brings into the citizen, where they may or may not be aware how much information they're sharing with the company or with others. This gives us the chance to have Internet of Things, smart cities, a lot of ambitious approaches that seem like they will improve society. And they will if we make the right policy choices, as has been mentioned. But there's also consequences to building this up. And I emphasize this because AI seems on its face as a very clean suite of technologies. You're using information, you're using intelligence, but there's physical consequences to the products that enable us to live those lives. It can be water diversion that affects populations through dams. It can also be the materials needed to build some of the hardware that we're using to enable all of these applications. So I show you here a mine that's used to develop and produce some of the materials, metals, rare earths, platinum group metals, that are used in the devices that you're using right now and the devices that are used for AI data mining. So your data mining requires mineral mining. I think that's something that's important to keep in mind. And I'll show you another picture of a different mine and a third picture of a different mine. These are in 3 different countries. One is China, one is Peru, one is the US. So to keep in mind these actual consequences of building up these technologies at scale. These jobs are partially automated, not fully automated, and so there's a consequence there. And then to the coworker, it means new ways of working together and being trained, perhaps more in isolation and perhaps more with cobotics, and that's something that we will continue to look at how to augment. It also means more complicated structures will be produced, so that's the creative element that we've discussed. And then to the company, it means something very specific. You're able to produce products that are highly customized very rapidly with increased automation that can include some job displacement, but can more often include more creative uses of the humans within the factories. And in these challenges that relate to all of the manufacturing investments made in the US and in other countries, I'm showing you here the 14 manufacturing USA institutes that were stood up in the past few years. How to think about how to reskill, retrain, and augment the workers with AI is going to be the challenge for this country in the next 10 years. Other countries are ahead of us in this regard. Many countries are behind, and so working together through efforts like the World Economic Forum helps us think about the future of production that includes the future of work and AI.
So Okay, real. Good. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. In my case, after 25 years at Xerox Corporation, I joined IBM earlier this year in research. And so about half of IBM's revenue today comes from what we call our cognitive solutions business. So really looking at how, this should move. It's not, oh, here it is. Yeah, it was a green one. How can, as John also said, a lot of the tasks that professionals do today are being automated by AI. For example, if you are a cybersecurity professional and have to look at multiple databases to try to predict where the next hacker is, what they're doing, what's the next big thing that's coming at you, there's now capabilities, in fact, that's being sold also by the IBM Watson security business that can help security experts to do this job more effective and efficient by automating parts of the tasks. Or in financial services, as new regulations come out, having natural language processing and machine learning at your fingertips to actually read these new regulations, compare them to the old ones, and then adjust your processes within your company. So these specific tasks will help professionals do their work significantly better and give them significantly more insights and knowledge to do a great job. But many companies, I'm also on the board of a company called IDEXX, which is the largest animal diagnostic company in the world. And in IDEXX, we have moved AI to the edge. AI is going to be embedded all around us. And what happens here, there is a vet. If you take your pet to the vet, often the vet takes blood. These blood tests can be done in the veterinary's practice or sent to the reference lab. But if the vet needs to take urine, because a lot of diseases can be identified by looking at urine, it cannot be sent to the lab because it degrades. And so you have to do it immediately. And so the vet technician would look through the microscope, very, very manual, and then try to identify all the particles in the urine. That's image processing, right? And neural nets are extremely good at recognizing images and recognizing things within images, as you heard earlier from Jan LeCun. So what we did there is we trained neural networks with information, first with about 500,000 images, then deployed that into these systems that are now, you put the urine in there, and within 3 minutes, it detects and sees actually the particles within and can help the vet much more easily diagnose the pet's situation. And so the second release has gone out with 40 million images, because the other nice thing, and this is inferencing at the edge, it is done within the system right there, but then the vet corrects it if it doesn't work. It says, sorry, no, this is not this crystal, it's something else, sends it back to the IDEXX cloud, and the next release came out with 14 million images. So from 50% correct, initially this was only 50% correct, it's now like 90% correct. And the next version with 60 million images will be launched in January, will be almost 100% identifying like 12 different particles, way superhuman than any of the vets could ever do in the past. So this is truly automating a task that, number one, the vet didn't like to do, and that, number two, really augments and makes the vet, gives them superpower, as Mona said in the previous presentation. Again, I can go on and on. Other examples at Xerox, we worked with teachers. This is about a decade ago project where we observed that teachers would spend hours every night, anytime they did a task with 30 kids in the class, grading the task, and then they were just too tired even after all the grading, that was it. Every student got the same task, same medication. We had this system Ignite where, again, a multifunction device at the edge, that's why I wanted to show this example, would print out a test, the students would do the test, would scan it in, and then give the teacher within 3 minutes, instead of, again, a couple hours of work at night, the results of the students and group them by issues that they had. This was elementary school software. So again, a specific task, the teacher didn't like to do it, and it really helped the teacher get superpower, and Mona, I'm going to keep stealing your word here, to do a better job in personalizing education for the students. And so, John, this relates to your point and David Arthur's point about really automating tasks. So the point of view is more and more tasks will be automated, thereby augmenting human knowledge and human intelligence. And so as the exponential in processing power and the exponential in network capabilities and social networks and the exponential in data will lead to an exponential in knowledge And at IBM, we like to call this Watson law, the Watson law instead of Metcalfe or Moore's law. Finally, the three principles which I think are extremely critical. In the interest of time, I'm going to go over them quickly. We can discuss them on the panel. The purpose here is, again, automating tasks which are, most of them are really boring because that's what narrow AI does today. It's not yet broad AI or next-gen AI. The narrow AI, you automate tasks to really make a professional much more effective and efficient. There has to be trust and transparency. To us, it is extremely critical that if you you go for a mortgage and you're said, no, you can't get your mortgage, and you ask why. Oh, sorry, Watson told me you couldn't get it. That's not going to, whatever, cut it, right? You need to get the insights of why you were not approved for a mortgage or why you have cancer. Being able to explainability is important. And then number 3, skills. We discussed it. It's very important. How does, and Jan Lacuna, the nice picture, right? How the skills have to keep up with the technology. IBM started 5 years ago creating a PTAC, Professional Technology School, with grades 9 and move it through grade 14. We now have 60 schools touching 12,000 students to really help them adopt these new technologies and then become very effective in applying them in the workforce. And so these are, I totally agree, people mentioned this morning, it's responsibilities of companies like us to really help retrain the new-collar workers for this new world we live in. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing how much time we have. Good, we have 20 minutes. So let me start by, AI, automation, augmentation. It's a dichotomy, but isn't it also a paradox? If you augment a human, don't you also need fewer humans? Let me ask that question to the panel as a whole. What is the consequence of augmentation for the society as a whole?
Well, I don't think you do need necessarily fewer humans at all, because for a given task, then you may replace that or augment as done by AI. But it also creates new things that you couldn't already do. I mean, somebody has to create the AI in the first place. There's a whole sort of new things which has to be done. There's things we haven't imagined yet which need to be done. So I think this is always this frisson with any new technology. Yes, it could mean that we need less humans, but we've always, for hundreds and hundreds of years, been able to come up with new ways of using it. People make new demands that we hadn't thought about.
You remain a Keynesian.
Sorry?
You remain a Keynesian.
Okay, not a Keynesian. I think all economists realize that it could be the case that the amount of work goes down and that changes how we do it. But it certainly hasn't been the case in the last few hundred years, and I see no necessity that it has to be the case in the future.
Sophie.
I think, in all the examples that I gave, it didn't, again, with the narrow AI, where specific tasks are automated, like for the teacher no longer having to do the grading and the grouping the kids, now she can spend more time personalizing and with individual students, so that's a benefit. For the vet, it hasn't replaced veterinary vets, because you still need them to deal with the pets and the patients, and the same in most of what IBM does, AI for professionals. People are working, at the end of the quarter, they're working like 60, 80 hours a week trying to close the books. If you have some of these AI capabilities on your shoulder, you can actually do it in a much more effective and efficient way. And in fact, perhaps, somebody mentioned there might be an opportunity for people to go back to 40-hour-a-week working. Being from Europe originally, I like that. I'm waiting for this. Instead of 60, 80 hours that some people do in certain times throughout the quarter.
Yeah, I am also optimistic on this, even though I've never heard of a 40-hour work week. So that seems mythical, yes. But I think that this idea that augmentation requires or will lead to fewer workers, that may be the case in certain tasks, but there's many, many tasks that it will not be the case for. And radiology was mentioned earlier. Earlier this morning, one of the key radiologists who's using AI and developing AI in his work at Mass General Hospital said this will absolutely not lead to fewer radiologists in the foreseeable future of his lifetime, because what is now being able to be done by computers gives the doctors now actually time to consult with each other and consult with their patients, which they currently don't have the time to do. So there are many things that humans would like to be doing with our time and are usually pleased when they can be automated. And that includes in the manufacturing production lines, a lot of unleashed creativity that we simply don't have time to access right now.
Overall, do you have a sense of whether augmentation will lead to deskilling or skilling? One of the things, a scenario I worry about is this, this human-machine combination will lead to humans, will take skills away from humans. You could see that potentially in radiology if it's deployed that way. Is there a general notion about the way this?
Yeah, I would say it's like first was AI for consumers, and again we saw the wave one that was shown earlier, where nobody remembers phone numbers anymore, right? It's just there. You push a button and you call your mom, or you don't need to remember facts. And that's the era of AI we're living in. It's a narrow AI era. Then we're going to move to broad AI and the general AI. But in this era, it's really about not having to do this memorization or really getting access to all of this data very effectively and very quickly. You still need your deep technical expertise as a professional to understand and what the systems will tell you, and then as was said, work with your colleagues and the patient or the student or the others to make sense out of it.
My favorite example is, we're all exposed to it, flights. We get on a plane and there is still two pilots in the front, even though most of the flight is actually conducted through the autopilot. They're no less good pilots than they used to be when they didn't have autopilot. They're just using and leveraging technology to make them safer in conducting a flight versus actually eliminating them. So I think that's a good paradigm for us to use when we think of augmentation versus automation.
So I do have some concerns here. I mean, what has happened for probably about 100 years is that technology has been skill biased in favor of skilled workers. So, what an extraordinary fact is that despite the huge increase of numbers of people going to, colleges and places like MIT, the wage premium for having skills has actually gone up, not down. Massive increase of supply, price has gone up. So demand has gone up, and that's been driven by technology. And in the first stage of that, it was replacing kind of routine tasks. First of all, the manual production line, and then increasingly routine clerical jobs like my mother's job. But I think AI is somewhat different. I think, as you mentioned, it affects people much further up the skill distribution. So, a radiologist is a pretty skilled job. 20 years ago, we'd be encouraging lots of people to get those type of skills. Yet I think AI is replacing many of those type of relatively highly skilled jobs. Yes, there's going to be, top 1% jobs like ours who are still in high demand. But I think going below that, there was a lot of people who thought they were in pretty highly skilled places who are now going to see that, their tasks are disappearing now. And I think the challenge is, can they go further up the skill ladder, or will they actually fall down the skill ladder? And I think there's a genuine issue there.
Sophie, I mean, the question of Watson, IBM, I've seen really wonderful advertisements about the notion of augmenting doctors, which is a really wonderful idea. But societally, maybe we should actually augment physician assistants and have fewer doctors. It becomes a much more complex question. Have you thought about that level of sort of?
No, I think ultimately knowledge will also be democratized, right? Like with a Watson on the shoulder or an AI system on your shoulder. What physicians do today, nurses will be able to help with tomorrow, right? If they can really get a lot of insights and information and then have the dialogue with the patient. So yes, these systems will benefit basically everybody. In the end, there could be a nice app on your phone. And in fact, it exists already today. Skin cancer detection is an example of extremely narrow AI. It's excellent. There are tools out there that are excellent today. But still, you have to go to your physician then about what's the treatment plan. I mean, the whole reasoning and coming up with new solutions, I mean, that's still a whole area that needs to be, of course, discovered, and a lot of work is going on in that space. But coming back to the radiologists, so IDEX, the veterinary company, employs a lot of radiologists because they look at X-ray images of the pictures of pets, etc., and they can't hire enough. So there just weren't enough great radiologists in the veterinary area, the space available to be able to do that because it's difficult. You're not just looking at humans, you're looking at all these different creatures. And so in that situation, they are extremely delighted to have now one radiologist have the productivity of a few of them going forward.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that the de-skilling versus reskilling will also be culturally dependent. So it's moving up the skill chart quite a bit, I agree, but it also depends on your culture. So for example, in Japan, there's a much higher level of comfort with robots that appear to have human features and the interaction with these robots, so that they're being developed with AI capabilities to interact with the older population, to care for the elderly, right? That's not something that is equally enamoring to the US population, right? So we think about, oh, that's a creative job that would be filled by the human. But in other cultures, in other countries, that is a creative job that would actually be filled by the robot. So it won't just be the skill set, it'll also be determined by the local culture.
I think that's a really interesting example as well, because I think that, one of the huge areas of growth is going to be, caring for seniors. And that's, as societies age, thinking about kind of care homes and the role of robots in care homes. And people say, well, it never happened, and maybe in the US it's harder than Japan. But it's also, if you think about that job as there's some tasks on that, which, are like physical, manual tasks, moving people, helping them have a bath, just the physical moving. And I think, machines and robots actually can help with those. Whereas the softer skills, the kind of emotional interaction and the support and the conversation, that is something which is very, very, very difficult to automate, whether they'll ever do a part. So I think that's an example where, the job of someone who's in care may focus much more on the kind of soft skills element, which are harder to do in AI. And the more manual type of tasks will be the things which get maybe increasingly taken over by robot-based AI.
Do you follow the pace of those kinds of autonomous systems? Looking at the most recent DARPA Grand Challenge, which was just 2 years ago, the notion of robots moving autonomously in unstructured environments looks like it's very long away, and maybe we'll be lucky if the robots come just in time for a particular generation. I mean, Sophie, do you have a sense about the pace of automation in these? I mean, self-driving cars are still in a structured environment. Moving around in a completely unstructured environment is a very challenging task.
In IBM, we're not into robots itself, right? It's I was looking at you. Maybe that's one with your industry 4.0. I think today, like drones and robots, they are autonomous. They're not yet intelligent, right? I think ultimately we are working at IBM on a lot of technologies that will also allow the intelligence to move into the drone or into the car, so it doesn't need to constantly get back to the cloud and get their instructions and information. And there's a lot of big processing capability happening in the cloud today. How do you miniaturize this? How do you get to extremely low power? How do you create whole new neural network inspired chips and ASICs? And in fact, having said that now, we were both talking about it earlier, at IBM we're also extremely looking forward and very optimistic about the new partnership IBM and MIT have formed. So many of the new colleagues are in the audience here, creating the MIT IBM Watson AI Lab. Just announced it a month ago, and now everybody is submitting. Of course, with David Arthur and your team, we had been collaborating for a long time, but the students, the professors, the researchers, it's a joint research lab that we're going to be addressing a lot of these challenges. And again, with the focus on how do we make sure it's done in an ethical way and in a fair way so we make a positive impact on society?
Dimitri, one of the things that you said that gave me pause was the notion of the end of the FTE. What does that world look like?
So again, I think we killed the FTE 10 years ago when we killed the 40-hour work week, because none of us works 40 hours anymore. So that notion has long been dead, but probably to a negative effect to most of us. So I think the notion of having somebody in a place or for a given task, 40 hours a week, 50 hours, 60 hours a week, whatever it is, what is their job description is going to change. I think we're gonna start hiring people for skills and just on-demand type of expectation. So employment will be a platform. It's not gonna be a career. It's not gonna be that I'm joining a company and I'm gonna be here for the next 40 years. I am here to do this specific task that I am very skilled on, and then I move on to my next place of employment.
Does it suggest a move toward de-skilling? If you think about humans in this kind of Charlie Chaplin-like environment in which they're doing a different task or perhaps a different job on somebody's talent platform every hour, perhaps?
Not necessarily de-skilling. I would say actually it forces a bigger divide between lower skill and higher skills, because you're going to have those high-skilled individuals that are coveted and needed by many organizations and have that opportunity to work with multiple entities, whereas the individuals with low skills will start seeing themselves becoming more and more obsolete through technology. So that's, I think, what we have as a challenge ahead of us is how do we bring everybody forth, not just the select few that have access to technology.
So, Sophie, I wanted to ask you about the practical distinctions between an augmentation strategy within a corporation and an automation strategy. And I wonder, one of the sort of categories I think a lot about is the call center. And I think about the notion of what you do with the call center operator. You could replace them, or you could perhaps create a system around them that would augment them. Has IBM faced this, or?
So yes, both IBM faced it, and my previous company at Xerox, we had a big customer care business before Xerox split into two companies and kept traditional printing, publishing, managed print services in Xerox and spun off all the BPO. But we had 40,000 call center agents on staff that were doing the customer care for the airlines, for the retail, for whatever, many telecom, many different industries. And clearly, within the labs, we were coming up with tools to augment their knowledge, right? If there is a certain product, right? I mean, this customer care for this gadget, making sure at your fingertips with natural language processing, they could access and get the right information to really have an effective and efficient dialogue with the client that was calling. Obviously, what's happening to these call center agents' job is many of them are being automated with virtual agents and chatbots, which are becoming better and better, especially in very narrow areas. Just customer care for this particular, hopefully fairly simple gadget, most probably virtual agents will already do as well as a regular customer care agent today. And even like a company like Soul Machines, I think Australian company, if you go check them out, the virtual agents, I mean, they really interact with you through the camera. They look like real humans even today. So some of these jobs that are currently like the minimum income jobs to really follow already very well scripted customer care related rules, I do see those being automated.
If I may add one point on this, and it's actually one of my favorite examples about call centers.
Yeah.
Large global furniture manufacturer, not many of them around, so you can probably deduct which one I'm talking about. So they had 4,000 people in their call centers, and they were a $10 billion company. They are today a $30 billion company, and they still have 4,000 people in the call centers. What they actually did, they took the excess capacity and need that for additional people and automated it. So the level 0, level 1 type of support, typically in a call center, is now being handled by virtual agents, and anybody that actually needs to speak to a person and it's a more complex type of discussion goes to that level 2, level 3 type of support.
Plus, I mean, indeed, and you can have a more personalized and create better linkage to the individual customers because all the knowledge about that customer is at your fingertips. You don't have to say again your name, where you live, I mean, all of that. Of course, you need to securely make sure you talk to the right person, but all the knowledge is at the fingertips of the person who ultimately picks up the phone to be able to give the best possible customer experience and potentially upsell and do a whole bunch of other things that today is in many call centers not even happening.
It's a better experience.
Yeah, it's a better experience in the end.
Where are the ethical decisions situated in this kind of a world where you have to make augment versus AI decisions? Whose responsibility is it to make these design decisions on whether we augment or?
I think that's a good question. I think there is a responsibility of industry, of the individual company, because the company has employees and their employees will be impacted. I think there's also, there's a responsibility on society in terms of thinking about, given that augmentation may result in some workers requiring reskilling or being laid off, coming up with the compensation mechanisms to deal with that and create new opportunities. In most cultures, including the US, reskilling and retraining is available when you have shifts in the kinds of jobs. And it's not welcomed by the workers who need to be reskilled, right? None of us want to be told we've become at least partially obsolete so we could go to this nice training center. So I think policy, at state and federal levels has to think about, how do we really provide that resource to the workers? It can't be all on the companies. It can be partially on the companies. And then I would say one more thing. We are talking about augmentation as we have the current workforce that is able-bodied. You also want to think about the possibility that augmented workforces now enable some of the community that has physical disabilities to join the highly skilled workforce in new ways, right? Exactly. So that is a positive that is a responsibility of the companies as well as the policymakers.
One paradox about this, the question of the ethics of automated systems, is one of the good things about having an automated system is you're making explicit what was often implicit ethical judgments which would be made by people in the company the whole time. You had to make decisions, and now this is actually an explicit decision because it's automated. But the paradox is, of course, the kind of progressivity of AI has been precisely through machine learning, where it's a kind of often a complete black box as to how these decisions are being made. So I think this is going to be a kind of tension. I mean, there's a positive thing about making explicit your ethical judgments, but then actually explaining what the black box does is going to be harder and harder.
Question was more about automation versus augmentation, high level. You're going to what's embedded within the AI models, right? What ethical biases, et cetera. And I think all of the engineers and the AI scientists who are building these models or training these models, it's our responsibility to make sure that they are fair, that they are transparent, at least in AI for professionals or AI for business, and that they're not biased. Yeah.
So we are out of time. Yeah. This is a good panel. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And